Welcome to Bloomington North Rotary. It is Thursday, April the 29th. I am filling in for our current president, Brian Hain, who's speaking at the Sullivan Rotary Club today. Welcome to everybody. A few brief announcements. We have our Wines of Africa event that will be at Mark and Jean Dayton's house on Friday, May the 21st. Tickets are $25 a piece. If you wish to attend and you wish to, you can either provide a check made out to Bloomington North Rotary that evening, or you can send me an email and we will have it added to your quarterly dues statement. This is a great social event, great time to ask for people to visit. It's a nice informal way to meet Rotarians and to give people a sense of the Fellowship of Rotary. Jackson Taguri will be joining us, I hear, from Michigan, because we're going to be, this is a fundraiser for our international projects, and we're going to be talking about our current international project that we're working on at that event as well. So if by chance it would be raining on Friday the 21st, our rain date is Saturday the 22nd. 6 p.m. is the start time. So that's what I have about that. Anybody else have any announcements for the good of the order? Yes, Charlie?
I was at Teachers Warehouse yesterday, and on May 20th, if you order online or in person at Avers and let them know that it's for Teachers Warehouse, they're going to donate 20%.
What day is that?
May 20th.
Okay. Okay, Avers for TW. Perfect.
Yeah,
so mention it. Oh, yes, and that's the other thing. Gabe and Melissa are having their baby today. Or I'm assuming they're having their baby. If Ezra had not decided to come into the world of his own volition, he was being induced today. So they're at the hospital. They have started a meal train. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's an online sign up sheet where you can volunteer to either bring a meal to them or send gift cards for local restaurants and things that they can use for meals. As most of you know, they've had a tricky last few months. They had COVID. Gabe had a diagnosis of testicular cancer and underwent surgery. It was a surgical cure. They're very confident that ongoing his prognosis is very, very good. And they've got a toddler. So this has been a really busy, stressful time for them. So if anybody's interested in helping on the meal train, hit me up via email and I will email you the link. So yes, Jean?
I just wanted to say, for all of you who have ever had a child, I think we all know that 1 + 1 = 4 when it comes to children and family. So I know they'd appreciate any help that anybody can offer.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, Judy, couldn't we do a club, the club send a gift card or something like that?
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
How about, what do you think? Like $100?
Yeah, I'll move. We do $100, either cash or gift card or whatever.
Perfect.
That's a motion.
Yep. I will send $100 gift card. And on behalf of the club, I think that's an excellent idea. Thank you, Tim. All right. Our speaker today is our very own Gary Taylor. He's going to tell us about the life and times of Gary Taylor. And if everybody would mute at the end of Gary's talk, we'll open it up for questions, and really appreciate him doing this. I know that Brian had been after him for a while, so looking forward to hear what he has to say.
Well, I'm not very savvy from a technology standpoint, and I don't see myself on here now, so I'm wondering if I'm coming through.
I can see you and hear you, Gary.
Okay, fine. Several speakers have stood Brian up over the time, but this is the first time he stood up a speaker by not showing up, but that shows his good judgment. And You know, I really was reluctant to do this because looking back, I haven't had many things that are memorable in my life of a positive nature. Although I've had a good life and I enjoy my life, but wonderful family, but I've just not been outstanding in anything. And I was afraid if I spoke that I would be a former member of this club because you would kick me out on the spot. And but I felt very lucky that you folks took me in after we moved in from Indianapolis after 48 years up there. And I kind of felt like, not like Henry Ford, but I like to tell the statement that Henry Ford in the 20s made a visit to Ireland. And he was in Dublin, and there was a delegation of people who came from the hospital. They were starting a hospital over there, building it, trying to raise money. So he gave them $5,000. And so they were appreciative. Next day, the newspaper had a headline there, Henry Ford gives a hospital $50,000. And so he, the delegation, of course, were embarrassed about that. So they came to him again and told him that they apologized. That was just a mistake with the newspaper there, but they would issue a retraction and it would be right the next day about the $5,000. He decided that probably wouldn't be the thing to do. He said, I'll go ahead and give the 50,000, provided that you put an inscription in the front door of the hospital. It's a verse from the book of Matthew, chapter 25. He said, I came amongst you as a stranger and you took me in. And so consequently, I feel a little bit like that. At least you did take me in, and I'm grateful. As you can tell, I'm disorganized here. Before I forget it, I would like to thank Charlie. I think maybe, I can't see myself, but you may see the printer that he graciously didn't give me, but provided for me on short notice, and that served me well. I'm doing very little productive these days, but it just so happened that I was in a bad mind when he came up with that within a day and came over here and installed it for us. And I was doing a little pro bono, and I had an HP printer, and I used off some ink toner on the thing that wasn't theirs, and they sent out an update to the computer that just froze the thing. And you know, it really gave me bad feelings about HP, but of course the timing was the day I was supposed to have something out from a pro bono basis, and Charlie saw to it that I at least wasn't a complete failure and all that. But I often used to talk to Rotary clubs quite frequently, and I would kind of start out with telling them I'm from Princeton, Indiana. That's close to Evansville, not too far from Vincennes, where Red Skelton is from. And Red, I think, ran off from about the age of 12 with the circus in Vincennes. And now I understand there's a magnificent museum there at the University of Vincennes University, dedicated to Red Skelton, and has a lot of his memorabilia there. And I hope to get down there sometime. He had a couple of cousins in Princeton, but they were at that time not very affluent either. And but I often mention Princeton because I saw Jack Benny one time being interviewed by Dick Cavett, and he asked Cavett, he said, where am I from? I told him, Waukegan, Illinois. And how do you know that? He said, well, you use it in all your monologues. And he said, yeah, I use that as a trick. And he says, you know, there's 1,000 comedians from Chicago, but I'm the only one from Waukegan, and I mention it all the time. So I thought, well, if that works for Jack Benny, maybe it'll work for me just a little bit. And so, and you'd be surprised that oftentimes somebody will come up against that, and I haven't done this for some years, but they'd say they knew somebody from Princeton. You know, or they drove through Princeton one time and noticed the stoplight there, things of that nature, you know. And I think that Joe mentioned to me one time that his grandparents lived in Princeton, out close to the fairground. And in addition to Red Skelton running off with the circus, we had a couple of girls when I was in high school down there, or junior high or something, that they literally ran off from the circus in Princeton. And it's unfortunate, but they probably bettered themselves, or would have bettered themselves, had they not been retrieved. But instead of running off with the circus, it's my understanding that the circus dropped Joe off there in Princeton to his grandparents. But it may be or may not be. I was up here at Bloomington 64, 5, and 6. And I really liked Bloomington and so forth. My wife and I got married, and she was a graduate of University of Evansville. And I decided to go to law school, and which she was very supportive of. And although I was going to say, I've been around politics all my life. My dad never graduated from high school, but in his old age, he became mayor of Princeton when they got the Toyota plant there. And so, you know, a lot of people were involved in that, state, national, and everything else. But it turns out that the national media could identify with one little mayor better than they could 3 county commissioners and 10 county councilmen and so forth. And he got publicity all over the world for it. Time magazine even had his picture in there with a couple of officials, and it said that George Taylor fought the evil empire of Japan as a Marine and now has made peace with them. And the comments were kind of very, very kind, very touching. However, I'm kind of glad that my grandmother had passed away by then, because she had had 2 sons in the Pacific, and the war was still going on in her mind to an extent until she died. But Dad even wound up, he had bought 2 Toyotas along the way to show support. Of course, the rumors got out there that Toyota gave him the cars, which didn't happen. He even bought them at the dealership in Terre Haute rather than the one in Evansville, because the guy in Evansville wanted to give him a deal on them. But that didn't stop the rumors just the same. Well, we moved to Indianapolis, and I got a job at AUL up there, and then I went to law school at night. My wife was a teacher, and so we enjoyed that very much. When I graduated, of course, AUL gave me a job, although I was already in the legal department doing quasi-legal work. They made it kind of official, and I stayed on for another 35 years. And but I did have a couple of other opportunities that came by that, you know, in retrospect, maybe I should have taken, or maybe I shouldn't have taken. But you know, history doesn't allow us to test alternatives. They may have been failures, but you just don't know. But my wife made the decision for me, and she got herself pregnant, and our daughter was married, was born on the day I was admitted to law school. My wife is a planner, and I'm more haphazard about the thing. In fact, a good deal of my career was putting out brush fires, and sometimes they were larger than brush fires. And but I found that I had a great deal of freedom so long as I was available when those kinds of things came up. But starting brush fires, I kind of started out not with a brush fire, but an outhouse fire. We didn't have plumbing in our house until I was 6 years old. When I was about 4 years old, I wound up setting fire to the outhouse, you know, 25 feet from town. And of course, in Princeton, that made big news. And And my mother kept the newspaper, and it says 4-year-old Gary Taylor sets fire to outhouse. And it was such good news that 25 years later, and the paper ran it again. You know, now we try to protect minors from those kinds of problems, but we didn't then. We moved into Annapolis, and my wife got to be a teacher, and we on the east side, we went to the Irvington United Methodist Church. We thought it was a cathedral walking in there, you know, as big as it is. It seated about 750 people. And a few years before we made it there, the minister was very charismatic. The mayor, the governor, and so forth would often show up at for services and so forth. And Henry Stricker's son, George, was a member there. And so until he died, Henry was around occasionally. But Henry was very gifted. He would pack the place 3 times a Sunday. And he would, they got so they'd have to put folding chairs in the aisles and so forth. And then it got so much that they put a speaker down in the basement, which they called the fellowship hall. People would come in there to listen to Henry. And so anyway, he was very gifted, and but Henry had a little weakness for women, and he ran off with the choir director. And things went bad from there on. However, the church was about 3,000 members at the time he left, and they maintained good standing up through the 70s till the 80s. And now I don't think they have 300 members, and it's a shame. It's still beautiful, and they have a beautiful pipe organ. But anyway, I was called upon by emergency to speak to a dinner at the church on a Wednesday in the spring, and in the fall they have a series of 5 nights that they have dinners, and they had speakers in for that, and they had a kind of a distinguished speaker scheduled to come, but he had an absolute conflict that he wasn't aware of, and he just couldn't do it. So they asked me to come in on short notice to do that. Well, the church had been trying to keep a secret about Henry White for years, although it was known at the time. In fact, you may remember Merrill McFall was at the First United Methodist Church here for years, 20 years, in fact. Herman Wells recruited him to come in, and but they sent Merrill up there as minister in Bloomington, in Annapolis, Irvington, and then later to Columbus, and finally he ended up at Beck Chapel down here running that after he retired. But he still maintained a good congregation up there, 800 or 900 a Sunday and so forth for the times he was there for 5 or 6 years. And his son Chuck, that some of you may know or may not know, wrote a book about his father, and it has 20 pages about their stint in Irvington, which is quite interesting. But anyway, over the years, people in Irvington thought that was disappointing that Henry had done that, and I had several contacts with his children and a little contact with his ex-wife, and they didn't know where he was for 20 or 25 years, but he did finally show up and had his funeral there. But anyway, the day I was the people at the church tried to keep that secret about Henry, but I don't know how they did or thought they could in later years, because everybody in Irvington knew it, and elsewhere too. Howard Caldwell used to be the broadcaster at Channel 6, you know, and he said it came on the AP wire while he was giving a newscast, and he was a member of Irvington, and it just shocked him. That was the first he had heard of it. But anyway, when I got up to make my speech, they charged the people $5 to come on Wednesdays and have a little dinner and the speech. So I told them, you know, if I were them, I'd demand my $5 back. I said, you were promised Alan Lyle, and all you get is me. I said, you know, in the law business, we'd call that a bait and switch. I said, there hasn't been a bait and switch in Irvington like this since Henry White ran off with the choir director. And of course, there was great laughter there, and 3 young couples came up to me after that and thanked me profusely for telling what it was. They said, we knew there was a deep, dark secret there that, but we didn't know what it was. Now that we know, we can do something about it. I mean, it wasn't as bad as they thought. Nobody was worried about it anymore. It kind of reminds me of when Harry Truman fired General MacArthur. The Secretary of State was Dean Acheson, who I heard speak here at the IU Memorial Union, or not the Union, but the auditorium. And I heard Richard Nixon here when he was not, but between times he was vice president and president. But anyway, Secretary of State, former Acheson, said when they announced that, he felt kind of like this. He remembers about the farmer's daughter came and reported to him that she was met up with this salesman who was in a family way, and farmer said, oh, thank God. He said, I've been worried about that all my life. And he said, now it's done. So he could handle the reality. And I've sometimes found that too, that what we fear is sometimes a lot worse than the actuality once it occurs. We moved into Annapolis, and I had a cantankerous old aunt there, Bess, and Bess was being kind to her. I'd have to describe her as a bitch. Nobody could get along with her. Not even my wife, who gets along with everybody but me. And she really does that too, but that's because she's such a diplomat rather than me. But Bess had alienated her husband, her son, her grandson, and she even had a great grandson. They didn't even bother to tell her about. But she was my mother's favorite aunt. My mother's father, my grandfather, was killed in a train wreck, and when my mother was 3 years old, and so she and her other aunt and his father, great grandfather, were the links to her father. And so when we moved into Annapolis, she made me promise I'd go visit Bess every week. And so I did. But anyway, her husband had a girlfriend, and we always heard that the girlfriend's husband had killed him. Well, in a way, maybe that was true. He came to the venue where Hugh and the girlfriend were, and with the intent to kill him, but literally scared Hugh to death. He had a heart attack and died within minutes. And so the man was never charged of anything. I don't know what she alienated her husband or her son with, Harold, but Harold, he didn't want anything to do with her. He was a golf pro out at some place that Winthrop Rockefeller owned out in Hawaii. And I finally got him to come and see her once or twice a year, and he wouldn't stay with her. He'd stay at the Marriott a couple miles away because all she'd do is complain. The grandson was a fine guy. And so anyway, but she had put him through college, and for years she'd bragged about putting him through college and so forth. And but she went to his graduation, and she asked him when he was going to pay her off, and he didn't know that was the deal, nor did anyone else in the family know that. But anyway, she harped on that, when was he going to pay her off. Well, it came honest, I guess, in the family, because her dad asked her that at Hugh's funeral, that Hugh had borrowed money from her, and so Grandpa David asked him when she was going to pay that off. And so I guess she thought the same thing about her grandson, Ronnie. Well, she wouldn't get off of it. Complain. And then when he got married, well, he could afford to get married, but he couldn't afford to pay her off. And they had Kim, granddaughter. He could afford to have a kid, but couldn't afford to pay her off. And so then Ronnie and his wife just cut her off. And so finally, before she died, I got them to come to see her, and she gave some jewelry to Kim, who was 18 years old and beautiful within. And Ronnie asked me, he says, he said, should we tell her I also have a grandson that's 10 years old? And we decided that wouldn't be the thing to do, just upset her no. But Bess was a believer in Oral Roberts. She'd gone to hear him preach out at the fairgrounds in Indianapolis. That's how he got started. He and Billy Graham and a bunch of them. Jimmy Swaggart. Jimmy was down here in Bloomington in his early days preaching at the fairgrounds. And but anyway, Bess was one of the things that she was on. She was sending $1 a month for 15 years to Oral Roberts, and he wouldn't send her an answer back, except they'd send her some kind of a little letter to ask for the $1 for the next month. Of course, back then the postage didn't cost too much, but anyway, she sent him a letter, and he'd sent her a book on faith healing, and so anyway, she sent him a letter, and she said, "Dear Brother Roberts, thank you for the book on faith healing." She said, "I read it cover to cover." She says, you know, I've been sending you $1 a month for 15 years and haven't been healed of anything yet, and I want to know why. And she was just absolutely serious on that. So anyway, she said, I know sometimes this faith healing takes time, but at 79, my times are running out. So anyway, she sent the letter and no particular response. So the next month she sends the same kind of letter, probably identical to it. And she writes personal on the outside of the envelope and with her dollar in it and so forth. And of course, she didn't get any response from that. So the next week, 79 years old, she walks 4 blocks down the Linwood Square post office and sends it certified mail, return receipt requested. And still no response, and she was just damn determined that those secretaries weren't giving him his mail. So I decided this called for drastic measures. So I typed up a paper. It said Oral Roberts, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then I wrote her in my handwriting, which she should recognize the handwriting. I said, "Dear Sister Bessie, praise the Lord. Send more money and thou shalt be healed. For a measly $1 a month, you're lucky you're not worse off than what you are." And I signed it to Oral Roberts. And so she, next week when I came, she said, "Oh, you think that's funny, but I believe in this." And so anyway, it didn't stop there, and she still wanted to hear from him. So I told her, I said, "Well, I'll get a letter from him within 3 weeks." And she said, "How's that?" And I said, "Well, fill out your paperwork here and I'll put a note in it." Well, I had read in a biography of Andrew Carnegie that his sister had a couple of boys he was sending to college, I think Harvard, but she couldn't get those boys to write her a letter. Of course, back then they didn't have telephones as much and so forth, and the boys wouldn't write her. Carnegie says, he said, "I won't have any trouble getting a letter from him." He said, "I'll get a letter within a couple of weeks." So what he did, he sent them a nice letter, each of them, separate letters, and he mentioned that he had included a $10 gold piece, but he forgot to put the gold piece in. So anyway, the boys both wrote back to him, and so he got the response that they didn't get the $10, and so they did that. Well, so I decided that this called for drastic measures. So I took a little index card and put one of her return address stickers on there, and wrote in my left hand and put it in with her dollar. And I said, "Hope you get back with your wife." And well, they answered that for sure. That's the worst thing in the world that those preachers want, is rumors getting around that they're not in a faithful relationship, you know. So anyway, we heard from Oral Roberts, and then but I got to thinking, she sent her Bibles, prayer cloths, prayer rugs, other books, and so forth that for the few dollars that she'd send him in the course of a year, he'd send her 10 times that much. And and postage. So I came to the conclusion if everybody would send these birds $1, they'd go bankrupt. And Oral Roberts did go bankrupt at some point, as did Jimmy Baker. But she became kind of close to Jimmy Baker then for a while. And she would send him money when he was in prison up in Minnesota, close to that. She'd send him $3. He couldn't solicit money back then. But anyway, he could thank people for sending money to him. So anyway, so she got to writing him, and he'd send it back. And then for Christmas time came, Tammy Faye was still with him at that point, and so they sent out a Christmas card. It included a pencil drawing reproduced of Jim's cellmate had drawn of him and the grandson that had been up there at the prison to visit him. It was up there, the medical facility, federal facility close to Mayo's. And so anyway, I kind of thought that if Bess were to send $10 to that roommate rather than Baker, that might cause a little conflict up there. So she did. So that guy's name was Kevin Gilday. And by this time, Bess was headed toward the nursing home. So she had started using my address as her mail address. And so this Kevin Gilday was in for forgery. And so he thanked her for it, and he wrote her back, and he could ask for money apparently, because he asked her for $150 he needed to buy some etching pencils. So she wrote back and thanked him, said she didn't have 150, but sent him another 10. Well, it wasn't very long that he was getting out on probation and wanted to come and visit her. And so anyway, I couldn't let that happen. The mail was coming to the house. My wife saw it. She said, "You take care of this. We've got 2 daughters here. I don't want this guy coming here." So again, I thought it deserved drastic action. So I killed the bitch off. I wrote him a letter as the nephew and told him no need to come after all. She'd had an unfortunate accident and passed away. You know, actually all I did was to get her a post office box and the mail sent there. So we didn't want these people showing up at our house, you know. But anyway, over the course of time there in Irvington, at AUL, I was involved very much in building the 38-story skyscraper down there across from the State House, and enjoyed that and so forth. 2 of the top stories were mechanical rooms. So the top one that the public elevators go to is 36, but there are technically 38 stories there. And I had a great time there. One of my first assignments in the law department was that we had foreclosed on the old Graham Van Orman Hotel downtown. And in the early 50s, Van Orman bought it from whoever had the Graham family. And Van Orman, he was named F. Harold Van Orman, and he had been lieutenant governor here during the Klan years, during Ed Jackson's years. And he did not run for governor, but he owned the McCurdy Hotel in Evansville, and he owned the Graham Van Orman here. He owned the Van Orman in Fort Wayne, several of them in Ohio and Illinois. And he was a very good orator, and he was in demand. His wife, Susie, was a doctor's daughter, and they had a daughter that passed away at birth, and then 3 sons that were raised. And she ran for mayor in 1929 of Evansville. It's quite a progressive gal. He later divorced her, and he married an equestrian from the circus. And then after that marriage for 10 years, he married a trapeze artist from the circus. That was his third wife. And I've often thought that there needs to be a movie written about this character. Plus, the second wife he had, he married her at 20. And they had one son, Richard, who became a professor at Purdue. She married a doctor in Chicago who owned a hospital that Hillary Clinton was born in. And then she helped run that hospital and then became the CEO of the hospital when he died. And then she married, I think, one of the radiologists there was her third husband he just lived 4 or 5 years after that. But she had a magnificent story. She was from the Houdini family that had a 350-year career in circuses in Europe. And she is an official, she's passed away now, but official honoree. She's a member of the Circus Hall of Fame. Just an amazing story. Well, Van Orman, he was up and down in health from time, very handsome guy. But at the time he bought the hotel down here, he was living in it, and he was married to the trapeze artist at that particular time. And my predecessor in the job I had at AUL was a fellow by the name of Bob Bach. And Bob came down here to close the loan. Back in those days, they didn't have wire transfers and this as much. And they made wives sign the documents and things of that nature. And so the wife was the trapeze artist down there. She was 27 years old at the time. I think he'd married her when he was 23. But anyway, when she was. So she was an older lady compared to the 20-year-old. But he had some kind of an ailment, and that they had to carry him down from whatever room he was in on a stretcher down to the mezzanine there where they closed the loan. And so Bob told the story. And so anyway, I inquired about the trapeze artist. Did they have to carry her down too? And he said, no, she made it down on her own steam. Well, Van Orman, I guess he got a little tired of her a few years later, and he got infatuated with a lady they called the Black Widow out of Miami. This was in the 50s, early mid-50s. She'd killed her husband and gotten off, and he was determined he was going to marry her. Now, he was still married to the trapeze artist who was in Evansville at the time. Well, somebody caught him at the airport in Miami with the trapeze, or with the Black Widow, and but he and took a picture of it. He got a picture in the Evansville paper and so forth, and the reporter talked to Kitty, the then wife, and she said, well, he's supposed to be out buying a hotel, but we will discuss this when he comes home. But anyway, he just had an absolutely outrageous life. And he has this Richard I mentioned to you has 2 children that live here in Bloomington, the only 2 children he had. And I've written them a letter this week suggesting that each their grandmother and their grandfather deserve a movie about themselves, their lives. And I've never met them or talked to them. I just sent the letter this week, but I've been thinking about writing that down, movie script or something, or a book on Van Orman, because he was tied up with other things as well. But I just saw that I'll be 75 in August. I'm not going to get around to it, and the story will be lost unless these kids do that in all probability. So I hope they do. Well, during my life, like I say, my dad didn't graduate from high school, but he's always around politics. He's in the legislature a couple of terms. And for some reason or another, I have met every governor of Indiana since Harold Hanley, who was elected in 1956. I didn't meet him then, but I met him a few years later. He was on our board up there. And then when I was 16 years old, Dad had a meeting in the governor's office up there, was when he was in the legislature, and I came, it was in the summer, and I met up with Matt Welsh, and who was from Vincennes, and I'd kind of known Matt a little bit. So he I was in his office privately. I mean, the meeting had adjourned, and he just passed pleasantries and asked me where I was going to go to college. And well, frankly, I wasn't certain I'd be going to college. Nobody else in the family has. And I said, well, I'm going to go to IU. And what are you going to take? I said, oh, math and physics. Those are my strong points. And he said, oh, those guys will be a dime a dozen in 20 years. He said, you need to go to law school. Well, I don't know that that influenced me or didn't, but I did wind up going to law school. In a way, I feel kind of a little bit like Warren Buffett felt about Orville Wright. Buffett never invested in an airline until recently. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago. He said historically the airlines never made any money. And he said a good investor who saw Orville Wright down at Kitty Hawk should have shot him. That's probably what I should have done to Matt Welsh. But anyway, I guess things might have turned out not as well as they have. In fact, I pretty well enjoyed my life, and I appreciate your putting up with some of my stories. They could go on forever, but I think that Brian showed good judgment and not attending today, and you showed bad judgment by staying with me for a while. So, thank you very much.
I have a comment, Gary.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I lived a few years as a boy in Ellisville, and they have the fall festival, and Governor Schricker would come. Mm-hmm. His byline was, "Ain't God good to Indiana?" Mm-hmm. And Henry Schricker always wore a white suit, always drove a white Studebaker, and always wore a white cowboy hat. Uh-huh. He drove it himself. Yeah. Never had any guards around him or anything. But you've told an interesting sideline story about Governor Schricker. I never would have guessed it. A very interesting talk, Gary. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing it, Gary. I don't know about everybody else, but the laughter was very good for me. Anybody else have any comments, questions?
I'm still trying to visualize the outhouse. Did it go up, or did the firemen blow it over?
Well, they blew it over, but it got replaced the same day. But speaking of outhouses, Princeton is close to a pre-Civil War settlement called Lyle Station. That's 3 miles west of Princeton there. And they have restored the school there, and several prominent people came from there, several PhDs. I think the first Black Harvard PhD came from there. It was set up by owners from Tennessee, and I think there were maybe 11 or 12 of those kinds of settlements in Indiana of free Black people, dating prior to the Civil War. But this is the only one that's really intact. They had just restored the school, and Toyota gave them $1 million to start with, and working with it. And they have a cabin there that's actually the cabin of my wife's grandmother. They did not know it was a cabin when she was growing up, but when they tore it down, they found out there was a cabin inside, and they numbered the logs and this, that, and the other thing. And 20 years later, 30 years later or something, they restored that log cabin on the facility of Lyle Station. Now, my wife's family are not Black, but the cabin was within a mile of the site of where it stands now. And the family helped with that a little bit. Somebody paid for the roof and the foundation and the fireplace and so forth. And so, being the magnanimous guy I am, I offered to provide them with a brick outhouse in my wife's honor. And they turned that down on the basis that it was not of the period and they already had a frame outhouse there.
I think we need to have Gary's wife talk is what I think we need to do. Because I think we need a counter argument.
But we did, we paid for something. I think we paid for the fireplace being restored, but I thought that was a poor substitute, but that's what we did.
We, just a side note, back when I was president of our club, we had a lady from Greensburg, from the Rotary Club at Greensburg. She's passed away, but she came and gave us a talk about outhouses. And it was the funniest meeting, I tell you. It was hilarious.
Well, the funniest thing I've ever heard at a Rotary meeting was that you mentioned this perfect attendance deal. We had a guy, his name was Bill Moreau, and that he was to be honored for 45 years of perfect attendance. One day in Indianapolis, Tuesday they met, and he wasn't there. And of course, you can make this by going to other places or a committee meeting or this, that, and the other thing. It was the funniest thing I've ever encountered.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching 1 o'clock. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
Well, I just wanted to tell you that my oldest brother got perfect attendance in high school 1 year after being suspended for 3 days. And the guidance counselor was like, how in the world did this happen? So, perfect attendance.
Oh, God.
Well, everybody take good care. Have a great week. Email me if you want information for the meal train. I went ahead and sent $100 gift on behalf of the club. Email me tickets to the wine fellowship on the 21st of May. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great week.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Have a good day, everybody.